don't run as soon as Matt's done. We have door prizes at the end. So we got some nice stuff over there we're going to give away, and then glasses.
Online too.
Huh?
Online people too. Stay put.
Oh yeah, the online folks too. Except for the actual physical ones, we have gift cards, so those will be sent to you via email. The actual physical ones that we have over there, they won't be able to get. Get those. All right. So Matt's title is "Lend Me Your IRs." Your ears. How do you want me to say that? Ears?
Lend me your IRs.
Lend me your IRs. So, have you ever felt compelled to tip your cap to a malicious threat actor? Of course, we all kind of do. It's like, cool, you gotta live with that. You're gonna get caught. Protecting systems and networks as a tech defender means we're staying in the constant barrage of unsophisticated attacks from automated tools, botnet scrolls, exploit kits, fish kits, and script kiddies online, as we saw earlier. So once in a while we encounter attacks worthy of style points for creativity or new twists and old attack techniques. This talk features live demo reenactments from some advanced attacks investigated by the presenter. The live demos showcase technical deep dives of the underpinnings from both the attacker and investigator sides of the attacks. Takeaways are strategies, freely available tools, and techniques helpful during incident response investigation. Matt works on computer security incident response team, performing digital forensics and incident response. Is a show host for the Threat Real podcast, which is a good listening point. Matt has more than 20 years combined professional experience in IT and information security. He's a security director for the Cincinnati Networking Professional Association, or CINPA, which they meet on the following Thursday of us. So just a little plug for you there, Matt. So, and he's also Hacking is Not a Crime advocate, as we've seen earlier, as well from some of the other speakers. Volunteers as a technical mentor for Women's Security Alliance, and is a 2019 ComSpark Rising Tech Stars Award winner. Matt has presented on numerous information security topics at many technical meetup groups at prominent information security conferences across the country. Matt, thank you for coming out and presenting, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dr. C. It's great to be here in person again. I've never taken speaking engagements for granted, but being in person again is special. So thank you, everybody, for coming out, and definitely thank you for sticking it out to the very last talk of the day. See, just as many seats full as there were at the start of the day, so I take that as a positive. Thank you for sticking it out. I hope it's worth your while, so I will do my best. So for those who don't know me, my name is Matt Scheurer, and I work for a big, well-known organization as an InfoSec engineer performing DFIR on a CCERT. As previously mentioned, I'm one of the co-hosts for the Threat Real podcast. A little behind, but we'll get it ramped back up here, and give us a listen, if you will, with my co-host there, Micah Brown, in the front row. Thank you. And so just some quick points. So where I volunteer, again, I serve as chair for the CINPA Security SIG, meeting the third Thursday of each month. Sounds like we're going to have a conflict in November. Shame on you guys. But, we'll work it out. Ours is better. Come attend ours. Just kidding. Attend wherever you like. It's no big deal. We're all here to support one another. But I am an official Hacking is Not a Crime advocate and a technical mentor at WAMSA, the Women's Security Alliance. Just a quick disclaimer that yes, I do have a day job, but the opinions expressed are based solely on my own independent security research. It do not express or reflect the views or opinions of my employer. And then the objectives today are to provide reenactments of real-world attacks. We're going to talk about how these attacks worked, how and why they defeated some of our security solutions, and then we're going to show incident responses to these attacks. And we're going to demo investigative tools and techniques that anybody here can use. And then we're going to discuss lessons learned and key takeaways. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, everybody here probably knows this, but just to make sure, IOC or IOC is an indicator of compromise. IR is incident response. DFIR is digital forensics and incident response. And you might hear these terms used throughout the presentation. Other disclaimers that the demos are all based on 100% true stories. These demos dutifully recreate actual attacks. However, some of the details were altered. Investigation demos are sped up considerably in the interest of time. Also, I have a demo environment set up on my laptop specifically. You should really only do this kind of analysis in a dedicated sandbox, something that's volatile, just to make sure you don't get yourself infected. So when you see me doing stuff here on a local system, it's a pretend sandbox, just to make sure we're on the same page on that. And then also this does give live demos. So if things fail miserably, bear with me. But I'm doing live demos because I'm either bold, fearless, or crazy. Please pick two so I'm not just crazy. So our first scenario we're going to call the mystery attachment. And the preface for this is that there was a news headline from sort of summer of 2018 that a mouse spam campaign was targeting banks using Microsoft Publisher. Mouse spam campaigns happen all the time. Banks targeted all the time. What's unusual about this is that threat actors don't usually leverage Microsoft Publisher. Sure, you'll find macro in Excel, Microsoft Word, PDFs, will have malcode in them. Microsoft Publisher, not one of the big platforms that are leveraged heavily through threat actors. Anyway, there was a flawed Amy rat that was part of the Curse botnet. And anybody who gets the slides, and I know OISF is going to be posting these later on, there's a link to TrustWave down there if anybody wants to read the original article. But anyway, it was about a week later. I'm sitting at my desk, probably multitasking, working on a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. And I get somebody running up to my desk, and they're really frantic and freaking out. And they're just amped up, and they're telling me, hey, one of our VIPs tried to open up this document, this publisher file, actually, from their iPhone. And this is the IOCs from that news article, that stuff that had, a big buzz because it was targeting banks. Like this is just spot on with everything that we know about this particular flawed Amy rat, part of the Curse botnet. And so what I'm being asked is, hey, we need somebody to look at this and understand what's happened here. Now, to be honest, we don't have any good mobile forensics tools, and we don't really have somebody that's particularly expert level like Edmund in reverse engineering malware, let alone for a mobile platform. But still, in the environment, I'm the most qualified person to try to take a look at it. So what can I do other than say, yeah, I'll dig into it right away. And, the frantic visitors tell me, oh, we'll get you that attachment right away. We need to know, what's going on here and figure out, because this VIP has access to all sorts of sensitive data. So, when they first approached me, I'm like, yeah, I'll look into this thing. But as they're standing there talking and just kind of the anxiety on them, like that's just wearing off on me. And now all of a sudden, I'm starting to get worked up because of this visitor at my desk. So for the investigation, we're going to open up the demo file in our pretend sandbox. We're going to detonate and do research attempts and just sort of see the failures to understand anything about this file a little bit. And then I'm going to do a strings demo, and we'll hash the file and show you some of the searching I did for that. And then we'll look at the EXIF data while I'm pondering what my next steps are. So with that, let me go ahead and go to the file here. And I don't have Microsoft Publisher installed here in this Linux environment, so you're going to have to pretend this is Microsoft Publisher. And it's, a little bit different than what Edmund showed. It's the same concept, though. The threat actors are essentially telling you that, hey, you have to click the Enable Content button on this file in order to see the contents of it. Again, it's a total ruse, but we see this kind of thing in malicious files all the time. But looking at it, I can't find the macros. Now, I never spend any time on Microsoft Publisher. It's just simply not a productivity suite package that I ever use. So I don't know if it's my own ineptitude. We did have Publisher in our sandbox environment, but I couldn't figure anything out on this. So I went ahead and, in the sandbox, it does static analysis and runs automated static analysis tools and spits out a nice report. So we can try to understand what this thing actually did. While that's doing its thing, what I like to do if I am looking at an unknown file is just simply run strings through it. And when I run strings, what I like to do a lot of times is pipe it out through less, just because then I can use navigational tools, I can use find features, stuff like that. So if I pipe out strings to less, I can kind of line by line go through what I'm looking at here. And up at the top, you see some interesting things. This very much, if you do research, you find out this definitely looks like a legitimate Microsoft Publisher file. It's what you would expect to see at the top in strings. It tells you it's Microsoft Publisher 3 format, MS Publisher .3, and then you start getting like a bunch of stuff. It's human readable, but it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense. Just basically some simple gobbledygook that not really understanding exactly what's in here. Usually what you hope to find is some sort of thing that you can use, an artifact you can use for attribution. Maybe it's a comment code or just something that's plain text exposed. Somebody talked about Go language earlier. Go is notorious at dumping out plain text stuff, and lots of it in high volume when you run strings against it. But you can use it as a very quick and easy tool. And if you're not using something that has strings within your native OS, I know you can download it for Windows. I think Microsoft has a version of it available. For those of you who attended the OISF CyberChef workshop that I put together, you can use CyberChef to use strings. So very powerful tool. In this case, I didn't really find anything particularly interesting. While the sandbox is doing its analysis thing, let's just see what we can find out about it. And so if I do a SHA-256 sum of the, sum of the file, now I can dump out the hash for this particular file and, do research on that. And so while that analysis is running, I can actually try to see if this hash has been seen in the wild anywhere. So what I did with this is I went ahead and started looking in my usual places where I like to look for things. So I went to VirusTotal and searched for the hash there. And you probably won't be able to read it here, but in the top of the address field, you can see the hash value there. No matches found, so I didn't really find anything, which I thought is unusual. If we're getting targeted by commodity malware, I almost a little surprised that it's never been seen anywhere before, let alone having any sort of verdict on it as to whether it's malicious or not. So Jotty malware has a lot of the same engines, but sometimes it has a couple more that maybe aren't there. So you can see clearly searching for the hash here as well, hash not found. So this is kind of like strike 2. And just a quick note, so in my case, the tools in the environment that I had at the time that were available to me all supported SHA-256. I've had somebody actually ask me, well, what about MD5? Could you use MD5? Absolutely, you can use MD5. If your environment supports MD5, like you can't trust it for certain things, but for the purposes of identifying malware, it's usually sufficient hashing algorithm for that. My main point is use what's in your environment, know what your environment supports, and there's no right or wrong there. You could search both ways if you wanted to. Hybrid Analysis is a platform that'll do its own static analysis. This is something that's free that I was able to use that are, in addition to our commercial solution. Because as we all know, some skiers will find things that others miss, right? So I'm just trying to cast a wide net here. But it's getting interesting that all these places I'm searching, nothing has seen this particular file. So as I'm kind of wondering what's going on here, like I can't find anything about this. And then, about that time, I start getting the report that, it's not really finding any malicious content here, no bad artifacts. So I'm spending a ton of time searching on flawed Amy, Nakura's botnet. I'm looking for IOCs. I'm Googling different artifacts that are reporting. All this stuff is taking a lot of time. I also searched for the hash on Google and nothing. So at this point, I'm really kind of thinking, this isn't good, and I'm not quite sure exactly what to do. I can't identify this. Nothing flags it as being malicious. When I did our internal scanning, when I ran it through our sandbox detonation process, there's nothing that makes me say, this is definitely bad. But, again, it matches those IOCs from what we know about flawed Amy. So it's still very concerning. And at this point, I'm thinking, could this thing have been re-encoded? Is there some modification that could have been done by the threat actors to make sure it wouldn't get caught up by any scanners? Was this thing specially crafted some way, specifically to target this VIP user at our organization? And that all of a sudden tells me, okay, now we go from maybe something that's commodity malware to something that's very specific and targeted. And it's starting to get a little bit scary. And I'm thinking, okay, I can't tell what this is, but we need to do something here. And what's the appropriate course of action? At first I'm thinking, well, it's a Microsoft publisher file. It's an iPhone. The chances that you could have publisher-based malware infecting an iPhone, probably pretty slim. But I'm not comfortable with that level of risk because this is a VIP user that has access to lots of sensitive data. So I'm thinking that's not really a good option. So then I start thinking, well, what if we did a security wipe on the device and then basically let the user go about business as usual? Would that be thorough enough? Am I comfortable with that level of risk as long as the attachment and the email from it are gone? We do a security wipe on the device. I'm still not comfortable with that level of risk. So now my thought is, I don't know what else to do other than we're just going to confiscate the device, shut it down, throw it in the forensics room, and get this person a new device. Now, they weren't due for a device refresh yet, but they were within maybe 6 months or less of getting a refresh anyway, so it probably wouldn't have been any big deal to do that. But still, it's going to be bad news for the user. But as I'm thinking through all these things in my head, I finally get the idea, like, this is the dumbest thing ever, but I didn't look at the EXIF data. Question? Good question. So the question was this targeting the corporate email or the personal email? This was targeting their corporate email. So, yeah, and that was part of the other alarming thing, making me think, was this a targeted attack against us? And as I'm thinking that might be the best option is to confiscate the device, get them a new one. I thought this is the dumbest thing ever, but I didn't think to check the EXIF properties. Now in Windows, this is very simple. You can just right-click on the file, go into the properties, look at the details, see if there's an author assigned to it, see what properties it has, that kind of thing. Sometimes there's useful information in there, sometimes it isn't. Now you do have to take it with a grain of salt because what's in there might be spoofed. So in the Linux world, we can actually use the Perl EXIF tool. And so I will run that against the file here, and we'll go ahead and pipe it out to less. And so we start getting the EXIF property data here. And the MIME type for this is like FPX. You can see the extension on there, image/vnd.fpx. I've never really seen this before, but I don't look at publisher files very often, almost never, in fact. So I started Googling this stuff, and I'm looking at it, and yeah, it turns out these are what you should see for a Microsoft publisher file. So by all looks, like this thing looks normal. And then I look at the author. Now, the author in real life didn't exactly say test fish, but we'll go back to the slides here. And yeah, this was actually a facepalm moment. And it's when you realize that the email attachment you've spent 3 hours or more researching and looking at came from your test phishing vendor. And it's okay if you want to laugh at my pain on this, because it hurt. It hurt right here. And so I didn't just trust that, right? Like I actually went through and validated this. I actually went into our mail, secure mail transfer agent platform and looked at pulled the headers out of there, and I'm looking, and it really was what I expected to see. So I'm looking at it. Like, it might as well just tell me, yes, Matt, this really is your test phishing vendor's IP address, you dolt. And why this hurts is because I've gone out and given talks called Phishing Forensics, is it just suspicious or is it malicious? And guess what? I always start with the message headers. The one time I don't, man, it came back and bit me hard, and I felt like such a dummy. So what went wrong here? I got caught up in the moment by subconsciously letting somebody else influence my investigation, and their anxiety and bad assumptions wore off on me. And so, again, my standard process is always start with the message headers when you're investigating phishing emails and contents. I abandoned my own standards this one time by focusing on the attachment first. And so the road to redemption here was really just painful lessons learned for reminders to stick to my standard investigative processes and procedures. If I had started my investigation by looking at the headers first, I could have closed this investigation out in minutes instead of hours. And because it was test phishing and I proved it, we didn't need any further actions on that. The second scenario here, I'm calling security scanner evasion. And we're going to talk about the code here in a little bit. But the preface for this is that we get identical phishing emails. They are hitting inboxes, basically flooding inboxes, and we're getting wide-scale reports of this stuff coming in, and it's defeating our security solutions. So I look at it, and the hyperlink from the message, it doesn't look like the website's up anymore in the security tools I'm using. My thought is, well, maybe if it was taken down, we don't need to remediate this. It's already problem solved. But I'm not just taking that at face value. And so what I want to do is go ahead and investigate this and find out, was the website really taken down? And so for the investigation, we're going to look at the email message source code. We're going to look at the hyperlinks in particular. And then we're going to check the landing page with a security scanner. And again, we're just simulating this in my pretend sandbox, which is something I did in the real life sandbox. And then we're going to look at the landing page source code, and we're going to open up the phishing page in a sandbox just so we can see it here. So let me go ahead and go to the file. And so here's something like the email that came in here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so people can read it. And you're not going to be able to read the top line, but it's from, in this case, it's from evil.scammer@promisewearelegit.com. The subject is, this link is totally safe, and it's to phishing target, which is unwitting.victim@randomtarget.org. And so the email is something like this. Hello, phishing target. We have a really important message for you. To retrieve your message, click here. That's real subtle, isn't it? Regards, spoof sender. Now, I've been asked, hey, Matt, have you ever used this as a test phishing template? No, I haven't. But most of you know, as well as I do, if I did use this very same email as a test phishing template, there's still probably going to be at least one person, if not more, in the organization that's still going to click on this link, even though it has more red flags in it than you can find inside of Vladimir Putin's garage as souvenirs from his old KGB days. Now, I don't like to just hover over links to see what they are because I'm always afraid that whatever email client or browser or whatever I'm using might allow some JavaScript for like on mouse over or on hover, something like that to execute. So I like to actually look at the message source. So I'm going to go into the view menu and pull up the message source, and I'll make this a little bit bigger here. This way I can safely look at hyperlinks without actually clicking anything or hovering over anything, stuff like that. So if I search for HTTP or HTTPS, sure enough, I find a link. And so from here, I can copy it from the page code. And again, we know this is our link because you have the click here reference down here that's in that message. And let me go ahead and open it up in, again, my pretend sandbox browser, right? And Google's like, hey, you might not want to trust this. But I'm feeling dangerous since I'm in this environment. Okay. What I get is a 404 error message. Pretty typical, right? Looks like this file is no longer there. This page is down. Site might be down. So is this something I really need to worry about? From the looks of this, looks like it's nothing to worry about because the file isn't there. But I don't really want to trust that. So let's go ahead and get me out of strings here. And let me clear this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use curl to get that. And I still should have the address hyperlinked in here. And with curl, I can output that to a file. And we'll go ahead and call that unknown.html. And so what that's going to do is that's just going to get the source code. There's a number of ways you can pull down web source code. Another tool you can use is wget. And we can just simply wget, grab the file, and it's going to pull it down. So more than one way to skin a cat here. It doesn't really matter which technique you use. Whatever you have available, whatever's in your environment, whatever you're comfortable with. Let me go ahead and clear up the screen here. And if I look at the HTML files, you'll see they're the same byte size, 919 bytes. One is called index.html. That's what I got through wget. The other is what I exported from curl. You'll see they're the same file size. Now, one thing, it's an artifact of the local demo, and the fact that I'm using wget to retrieve a file off of the local system is it shows the original date of the file rather than today's date. In real life, when you use wget or curl, you're going to get the date that you retrieved the file. So just kind of ignore that part of this what you're seeing here. But I can forensically prove that it didn't matter which method I used to get these files. I can do another SHA-256 sum on the HTML files. And I can see that I've got the exact same hash value for both files. So it didn't matter which method I used. Either works. You know, go with what you like. And there's other methods as well, but those are the two common ones that I frequently go to. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what's in the file here. Because, again, we just got a standard 404 when we looked at this in our pretend sandbox. I'll make this a bit bigger here so people can see it. We don't really get a 404 here. What's interesting is we have some JavaScript. And whether you can read and understand the JavaScript or not, it's relatively easy. Let me break it down. So basically in the script, the first line is if the user agent is Chrome, go to this, redirect to this logon page, this login page. If it's Microsoft Edge, it's an else statement, go to that page. If it's Firefox, go to that page. If it's Microsoft Internet Explorer, Opera, Safari, if it's any of the common real-world web browsers, go to the login page. At the very bottom is the final else statement that says, if it's none of those things, then go to the fake 404 page. So now all of a sudden, what you realize when you look at this is actually checking to see if you're going to the site in a real web browser or if you're using some sort of tool that's not a common web browser. If you're using a tool that's not a common web browser, it's going to send you a 404 page to be deceptive so that you think it's already down. There's nothing I need to do here. What you realize looking at the other address here is that it's sending you somewhere entirely different if you're not coming in out of the sandbox, but through some other method. So oops. Oh, I just clicked the wrong thing. Hold on, let me launch a new Chrome here. Bear with me 1 second here. So I got 2 of them. All right, so let me go ahead and go to the page now. And I'm getting my deceptive warning thing again. Yeah, we know. Now all of a sudden what we have when we're going in a real web browser is a Microsoft Office 365 credential harvesting page. And this is something then that threat actors will use to collect usernames and passwords, as was discussed earlier in this conference, for the purpose of account takeover, business email compromise, that sort of thing. But definitely unusual here that threat actors sort of went the extra mile to use the browser user agent string redirection to basically check to make sure you're using a real web browser. Where this gets a little scary is I got lucky because the threat actors had used JavaScript, which is a client-side language. Very easy for me to look at. If the threat actor had used some sort of server-side language, be it PHP, CGI, Perl, Python, Ruby, ASP, whatever have you, if they had used that, I wouldn't be able to get the code. Sure, I'd be able to see that a redirect happened, but I wouldn't necessarily understand why. So just something to look out for if you see a redirect and you can't, figure out any other way. It could be something like that. The other thing to note here is, in this case, it was just looking for the common browsers. But think about this. If threat actors had an exploit that they knew only worked on Firefox, they could round robin check to see for Firefox users, send them to the malicious page, and then round robin them to whatever the eventual destination is after they've tried to do some sort of an exploit against that browser. And it can even get more granular than that. If I know that the exploit will only work against certain versions of the Firefox web browser, again, they could just change up what they're looking for in the user agent string and then really just target the specific browser versions. And think what a nightmare that is to analyze then, because if you're not hitting it with the right browser, you may never see the attack page. It gets harder to see, harder to discover, harder to detect, harder to mitigate, honestly, to when they've taken those actions. And, it gets a little scary. So the remediation in this case was we determined the actual phishing landing page, and we blocked it through content filtering. Then we worked with our secure email gateway vendor to block the active phishing campaign because it was pouring in pretty fast and heavy. My third and final scenario today, I'm calling the rabbit hole. And just to set the table for this, so I received a request from a user to investigate an email message they got to determine if it was legitimate or not. The email appears fishy at first glance, but is it just suspicious or is it malicious? Well, that's what we need to find out. So I can tell from the message headers when I'm looking at those that the source IP address was a mismatch for the sender's domain right away. The message source code in particular was interesting because the link text didn't match the actual hyperlink destination. In this case, the malicious threat actor's objective appeared to be credential harvesting for the purposes of account takeover. And we'll take a look at that. So let me go ahead and open up this email. And so this pretends to be from PayPal support. Of course, the email address is ppsupport@pwned-server.org. The subject is PayPal bank account change confirmation. Now, if I have a PayPal account and I didn't make any changes to it, why would I get a message saying that there's a change to it? And again, this is targeting our unwitting victim again. And the email is simply, "Dear PayPal customer, we received your request to update your bank account on file. This process will complete in the next 4 hours. If you didn't request this change, log in and reject the activity." Well, this is meant to basically instill a sense of urgency, because I know if I'm a user, I didn't make changes, I'm seeing this, I'm going to start getting amped up a little bit, because why is this happening? Has my account been breached, compromised? And more importantly, if I only have 4 hours, and maybe this email came in an hour ago, I've got a very limited amount of time to hop in and reject this pending change. So the threat actors are trying to instill this sense of urgency. And what gets interesting here is the hyperlink, that's the real PayPal login page, except it's not really exactly as it seems. And you'll see here in a minute when we look at the source code what I mean by that. Oops. Go back and let's get the message source. I'll make it bigger. And again, we'll look for our HTTP. And so here's the link that you see in the email that goes to the real PayPal login page. But that's just the link text. That's not the actual hyperlink itself. The actual href for the hyperlink is going to, my case scenario, something or .be, which is a Belgium domain. And if I'm not in Belgium and I'm a PayPal customer, already this should send off flags that, something isn't right here with this. So we'll take a look at this in our pretend sandbox again. And in this case, certainly looks like a PayPal login page. Looks trustworthy, except the fact that we know that this isn't right, and we didn't make any changes, that sort of thing. And what gets really interesting is if I look in the address bar closely enough, I notice the original hyperlink was a Belgium domain. Well, this is going to .de, which is a site in Germany. So what the heck's going on here? Let's try to figure out why. So we're going to use that same technique of using curl, and we're going to get that page from the email, not necessarily where we ended up, and we'll output that to first page HTML. And then we'll go ahead and pull that up in a text editor just so we can look at it. And for a login page, it's awful tiny for the actual HTML, the actual web content. And what you see here is a meta refresh. And what that is a way to redirect a browser to go to a different page. So we have our first page that's in Belgium, but we see it's actually redirecting to this site here in Germany, and it's not what we had before. And we noticed from the sandbox, that's kind of where we ended up as well. So really it's not the first landing page, but the second one that we need to look at next. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and use curl again. We'll put in our second destination, and we'll output that to second page. Now let's look at the source code here. Again, pretty tiny for what we would expect. And the reason for that is that you notice in the code, there's another domain in here, and it's inside of an iframe. And with the style command of absolute 100% width and height and no border, this is a seamless iframe. So the second page we think we're looking at, we're not even looking at that because the content is actually coming from this third page. So let's go ahead and get the source code for that page. And we'll output that to third page. And we'll take a look at that. And what do we end up with here? Gobbledygook. Now, believe it or not, I actually made this more readable. And you're probably thinking, what? You made this more readable? Because it doesn't look very readable to me. Now, what I mean by more readable is I put in some white space. This could all just be one block of garbage with no real easy way to discern, what's going on in here content-wise. But we can tell right away that it's some sort of JavaScript, and we can see it's using some sort of a unescape sequence here. And I'm just going to make a wild guess that there's a good chance that this is some sort of a function that's getting fed back into the actual unescape sequence. But it's not really readable. Now, in the olden days, this was kind of a pain. You would actually basically have to unescape the sequence following that, and then feed the function back into it to basically get the actual web code out. The important thing to remember, though, is with modern web browsers, any web browser really, if something's going to be readable on the screen, it has to be something that can be decoded at some level by the browser, because if it's not possible to do that, you'll never see it. So the threat actors wouldn't use a technique like that. And fortunately, with modern browsers, we actually have developer tools that are built into the browser that we can use to sort of do the heavy lifting for us and see what's going on. So again, just to recap, we talked about the first destination going to a compromised web host in one foreign country. It didn't stop there. It went to another compromised web host in yet another country. And then the third destination is a compromised web host in a third country. So like this thing has many layers of obfuscation starting all the way back to the original hyperlink not matching the link text in the email itself. So we got the source code, we looked at that. We see that it's got the JavaScript encoding. And so what we'll do is we'll use the built-in browser developer tools and try to understand this and make a little more sense of it. So let me go ahead and pull in the browser developer tools, get those loaded up. So now if I come back in here and I reload the that final destination page, now I can bounce back into the tools here, and I can see here that I've got just a very small level of HTML, but what I can do is I can actually right-click, edit as HTML. Now this looks exactly like what our text file did when we opened it up in a text editor, and we can see it a little better now. We've got the JavaScript here at the top. We can see the unescaped sequence. We can guess that that's pulling this df, might be some sort of a function. And it's very long, as you've probably get the idea from looking at the text file. But if we keep going in this, now all of a sudden we actually get to the actual decoded content here. So the browser developer tools will actually decode that JavaScript for us in order for us to read it. We can actually see the plain text version of the unescaped sequence. And then we see something interesting here, because we end up with more gobbledygook, right? But if you look at the link here, it's basically calling a shortcut icon. The MIME type here of image/x-icon, and then we see base64. So I'm going to guess that this is like a base64 encoded fav icon for the page. But we'll just kind of look over that a little bit here and go forward. And sure enough, we start seeing more regular HTML, but then we see more base64 encoding down here. And again, from the MIME type, we get the idea that it's a JPEG file and it's base64 encoded. And then once we get past that, there's more HTML in here, that sort of thing. What's really nice about browser developer tools is if I click on the network tab and then I am on the image tab here, you'll see it actually pulled the file, and if I mouse over that, I get the base64 decoded or encoded value of it. Tells me it's a JPEG. All the stuff I sort of expected to see based on the code I was looking at just a moment ago. What's really cool about this, though, is that we can actually click on that, and there's a preview tab that becomes available, and we see a PayPal logo. And if we go back to the page, we can kind of marry this up with what we were looking at. And so there, at the very top, right here, is the PayPal logo. What's interesting about the developer tools, though, is it didn't get that first base64 encoded item. And again, we're guessing that's like some sort of a fav icon, something like that. So let me edit the HTML, and we'll kind of show the old school way that we can do something like that by hand. And I kind of talk about that in the slide deck here. And so whether the threat actor, they've used encoded elements to avoid analysis and detection, or just keep the entire site as one single page file, they also use base64 encoded elements that we've seen inside of their JavaScript encoded page. So now we have encoding embedded in encoding using a couple different techniques for it. So very interesting. And like I said, it's hard to guess the motive, but either way, kind of sneaky and something that we can kind of understand a little bit. And so we've looked at decoding them using the browser developer tools. Let's see what that looks like doing it by hand. So I have to scroll past the encoded part here, and now I can get to the actual content of the first base64 encoded item. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and guess that this is a fav icon. So I'm just going to copy this. You can paste it in any text editor you want. And I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And we'll call it unknown.txt. And save it. And so we just have our plain text file that's that base64 stuff. And so then we can basically decode this by hand. So let me go back to the terminal here. I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. And I'm going to run base64 command. Oops. Do a -d to decode. And we know it's unknown.txt. And we're going to basically redirect that output to favicon.ico. And actually, I am going to throw a hyphen a -I in here. Base64-I just sort of ignores any warnings or stuff it thinks it can't interpret and spits out our redirected output to favicon. So now, if I come in here and look in my DFIR folder, I should have a favicon.aco file. And if I go ahead and blow this thing up, it sure looks like it might be a favicon file. And I know it's going to be microscopic and you may not be able to see this well or if at all, but you can tell here in the top of the browser tab, you get that little PayPal favicon. So we've successfully at this point decoded the 2 encoded elements inside of our encoded web file to really understand what those elements of it are. So that's kind of doing it by hand. But anyway, in this rate, even though they sent us on a wild goose chase, we determined the final landing page, and we blocked it through web content filtering. We also went ahead and blocked the intermediary sites since we knew they were compromised as well in order for threat actors to leverage those. And again, it gets harder to shut this thing down because if you only shut down the first address that you had, you're going to miss where the final payload is. They could send something else that's using those same redirect techniques, and there's a bunch of them, but the ones I had witnessed personally on it were the meta refresh and the iframe as a way to serve up that content. Once we blocked everything, we reported to compromised website owners. This was a lot easier in the past before Whois data was all privatized and privacy enforced. So you could actually tell where to email abuse complaints. And so we did that as well. So that's really it. But definitely as you see me hanging out here afterwards, if you want to join Micah and Penelope and I at the Troll Pub afterwards, feel free to hit me up. Give me your own DFIR stories. I love hearing war stories. And with that, let me just say, friends, Romans, OISF attendees, lend me your IRs! Any questions?
Any questions? We'll open up for questions. Anyone?
What
Yes.
sandbox do you tend to use? Like a remnant span or SID or?
So for reverse engineering malware, we have actually had a commercial solution. So if you don't have a commercial solution available, Sift and Remnux are awesome. You can definitely use tools from either of those to do definitely good analysis, particularly static analysis. So if I didn't have the commercial solution that we were paying big bucks for, I definitely would have used one of those if I didn't have one of those available. But a good question. Yes.
Very simple and recommended if you're going to use curl to try to hit the site at first. You have a way to just say, I want my user agent to be this, so you can pretend to be a browser.
Yeah, there are. It depends on the tool. Some will support customizing headers, and some of them will even give you a list of, hey, here's headers you can select to purport to be whatever browser you want. And you see threat actors and a lot of the offensive security tools will rotate through. You'll see an attack from the same origin address, and you see them cycling through a bunch of different user agent strings. So some defensive security tools will do that, some won't. It really just depends on the solution you're using. But you can certainly do it by hand. In particular, Chrome makes it very easy. I haven't really messed around with it in Firefox and some of the Microsoft browsers, but I imagine you can probably do it in those as well. And then I've also seen like extensions for those other browsers that will let you select specific user agent strings. So there are definitely options out there, but there may be some security tools that don't let you do that, and they just send a default user agent that's not a known good, normal everyday user browser, if you will. Yes, you can set the user agent string in curl as well. In this case, I'm not really interacting with it, so I didn't really need to specify any options just for the purpose of retrieving the page. But if you're actively interacting with the page and sending commands to the page, you can absolutely, within curl, use the different options to set your user agent string to be what you'd like. So, great point. Anything else? All right, folks, I have one humble request. I'm almost at 1,000 Twitter followers. help me out. I need like 5 more. If you're not following me at C3RKAH, please do. Thank you.
Follow you back, and maybe you get the prize you're going to give out when you hit 1,000.
I don't think it works like that. Besides, you'd be really upset if I gave you like an OISF, glass. I'm just joking, man. That's like one of the coolest. In all sincerity, that's like one of the coolest speaker giveaways I've ever seen. So thank you. Yeah, I've got my box over there. Yeah, I don't want to break it here on the stage, flailing about. So.
I don't know what you're talking about, man.
Oh no.
I do want to make one comment though about your first story. That's something similar that happened to me. I was deployed overseas for a couple of weeks. Came back. While I was overseas, I was trying to buy a few items. I had to call my bank because my credit card was not set to. I had it turned off, so because I was traveling. Well, I wanted to make a purchase, and so it denied the purchase to go through. So I had to call the bank to say, hey, I'm actually overseas trying to make this purchase. Right? So then I get back, and like 2 days later, I get this email that says, hey, we have a problem with your credit card. Click here on this link. And sure enough, I'm like, oh yeah, it was coincidental, perfect timing, right? But it was one of those training things. So I'm like, oh yeah, I know that I had problems with my credit card. This has got to be legit. And it did not take my first instinct and check the hyperlink and all that other stuff. Clicked on the link, and sure enough, it was our internal training thing. So I had to do the training. It just so happened to be the perfect timing, right? They were just coming back with the training. Anyway, so yeah, even the best of us, like Matt said, it drove him out nuts for hours trying to figure that out. It happens when you're in a rush and you don't take your time to evaluate and look at that kind of stuff carefully because it can very easily. Fortunately for me, it was just the internal training security thing. So the other thing I wanted to mention, I know Matt, you were picking on PayPal there. But I think we had to make a donation through PayPal, some of the QR codes. For some reason, it seems to be acting up. But the one that's on our website, if you go to ohioinfosec.org and go down to the donation link on our website, that one is working. So if you open up a browser and go to ohioinfosec.org, I just checked that on my phone. That one was working. I'm not sure why the QR, because it was working earlier this morning. We had about 5 different people test it out, and the QR code wasn't working. There you go. I'm not sure why there's something going on with it. Because it gives you an error saying that PayPal's down. What's that?
Was it going in that sandbox?
Well, that's why I'm like, oh, Matt, thanks. I'm trying to get donations here, and here we are picking up PayPal. We don't have it all redirected. So, all right, so Paul, where's Paul? We're going to do some raffle.